All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Kristen Neville. I'm the director of the Mendocino County Cannabis Department. We apologize for opening the webinar a little bit late this morning. We'll get our meeting going in just a couple of minutes here. Usually we start at 8:35. I think we might extend that to about 8:36 or 8:37, just to give folks the extra time to join us, since we did open the Zoom platform a couple minutes late. But just hold tight. I'm going to go ahead and mute my device, and we'll be back in just a few minutes to get started. All right. Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining. This is the Cannabis Department's weekly meeting. It is May 27th, 2022. I'm Kristen Neville, the director of the Mendocino County Cannabis Department. With me here today, we have Nina Holloway, supporting our facilitation of this event, getting the notes posted on the website, and the master of all streaming capabilities in our office. So thank you so much, Nina. And I think without further ado, we can go ahead and get ourselves started here. Agenda today. We've got a few updates for you. I think we'll be able to catch up our time a little bit since we're starting 2 minutes late via the updates. And then we're going to talk mostly about sensitive species habitat review. We're going to share our internal process for reviewing your materials for that sensitive species habitat review, and then how, if there's a referral, the material packet goes to CDFW, what happens when it comes back, so on and so forth. And then we'll make some time for public comment Q&A on this item. We're going to try to help weave in throughout the course of the conversation about sensitive species habitat review. We're going to try to weave in how it's applicable to your Appendix G checklist. So we're not going to do a heavy SQL conversation today, but we're going to try to help thread the needle, so to speak, so folks have a better understanding of how the sensitive species habitat review interplays with the development of your Appendix G checklist. And then we'll spend a few minutes just hearing suggestions for future agenda items. So I'll go on to the next slide. Reminder about how to participate. Folks, the Q&A feature is active. It's located generally at the bottom or the top of your screen. It's that cute little chat box like in the comic books that says Q&A on it. Just click on that icon. It will pop open another panel that you can type your questions or comments into. Questions and comments come to Nina and I because we're the panelists for today. If we do type an answer and response and send it out, it goes out to everyone. So then they'll see the question and the comment. So we've gotten a couple of good mornings. So yes, good morning to everyone as well. And the raise hand feature, is what we're going to ask you to use if during the public comment sessions or sections of today's meeting, you'd like to make a comment or ask a question. So the raise hand feature is in the same toolbar as the Q&A chat feature. And if you're not on the Zoom app and you're calling in from your phone today, perhaps, you can raise your hand by using *9 on your dial pad. You can also lower your hand by using the *9 feature. And when we do get to public comment, you can mute and unmute your phone using *6. And you can also mute and unmute your Zoom app by putting your cursor on your identification screen. And usually there's a little blue mute box that pops up in the upper right-hand side. But mute and unmute is often at the lower left-hand side of your main screen as well. So we'll be reviewing these when we do get into public comment. So you don't have to memorize them and you don't need a screenshot. We'll continue to remind you how to participate when we get into those sections of the meeting. Some upcoming dates. We just had our LEAP monthly meeting this week. So that was just on Wednesday. And here we are today having our MCD weekly update meeting. We'll be having another weekly update meeting next week. We haven't put all of the dates on here to notify you, but I think it's fair to assume that we'll be doing Friday weekly meetings until we announce our public technical assistance workshops. We are looking at starting those in July. We've been coordinating with Department of Fish and Wildlife and the water boards and the Department of Cannabis Control. And we're looking at some Fridays in July to really start getting out in the public to provide assistance. These workshops or technical assistance opportunities will allow applicants and permit holders to meet one-on-one with DFW staff, water board staff, DCC staff, and department staff. And department staff will be available to assist with Appendix G questions, application and permitting questions, but also we'll have a second station of department staff to assist with your grant writing, budget, and scope of project materials for LEAP and looking forward towards local jurisdiction assistance direct grant. So we'll have a grant workstation as well as an application and permitting workstation for assistance. So that is what we're working on. And again, we'll be aiming for Fridays for those meetings as well. And that is venue dependent. So as we head into summer wedding season, family reunions and whatnot, some of the Fridays are a little crunchy to schedule. So here we are, and we will get that schedule out to you as soon as we can solidify it, but it is still in the works. A couple general updates, just a quick reminder. True-up payments are due May 31st. We are still accepting true-up waivers or TTC waivers. If you are eligible, equity eligible, you can submit a waiver to cover the cost of your 2021 true-up statement. You can do that via email. The TTC waiver is on the Cannabis Program website on the Forms and Resources page. So if you wanted to email in your waiver because you're certified equity eligible, make sure you, in one email, please send us a completed TTC waiver form, your true-up statement, and your certification letter from Elevate Impact Mendocino. Those three items can be emailed into us completed. They can also be walked into the office. We do have counter hours Monday through Friday from 10 to 4. We're closed from noon to 1 for lunch. If you can't find the materials online for some reason, they are on the Forms and Resources page in the equity waiver section of that page. But if for some reason you're having a challenge with the website, downloading the materials, whatever it may be, we are happy to help you at the counter. We'll print the form, we'll help you fill it out, and we'll help you get it in. So we need to have those in our possession by the May 31st deadline in order to process them. Once the tax payments become delinquent, which happens on June 1st, we can't process a waiver in association with your true-up. So please do get those materials to us as soon as you can if you're planning on using a LEAP waiver to pay for your true-up. Deadline is closely and fastly approaching. So I want to do just some more staffing updates. I know this is a big issue for folks, and I wanted to just do a little reflection here. So looking back at what staffing looked like a year ago, we were over in planning and building services when I was hired on in March of 2021 as the cannabis program manager. We had 4 planners, 2 admins, and a part-time or extra help department analyst that was with us briefly through May. Well, with us meaning while I was with the department briefly through May. Heather had been assigned to work on development of the equity program. And then she was only a couple days a week. She was an extra help, so temporary extra help in the department or with PBS. As you can see, looking at this slide, we've had some transition in the department. In October, as we became a department, we also received allocations to staff up the department so that we can meet the needs of applicants and better serve the public in general. Where that left us was in a crunch to do some staffing. So pretty much starting in November, we hit the ground running with our first new hire, which was William Riley, our program administrator. He joined us in November, and then in December, we saw Diana de los Santos, Planner 1, and Geneva Beeman, who's our staff assistant. Many of you interact with Geneva at the front counter when you come see us. We brought on both of those full-time employees in December before the new year. In February, we were joined by Audrey Gardner, who's our department analyst, and Ms. Nina Holloway, who joined us as an administrative assistant and is now transitioning into the Planner Tech 1 position. So we're sad to lose her as an administrative assistant and excited to gain her as a Planner Tech. A little bit of a double-edged sword for us in the department because Nina helps us with so many gosh darn things in the admin world. In April, we welcomed Angelina Lane as a Planner Tech 2. And then recently this month, just a week ago, Ms. Tara Ryan joined us. She's filling our cartographer planner position. We're thrilled to have her. And then on Tuesday, the last day of May, we will be joined by Casey Miller and David Stock, both of whom are planner techs. So that leaves us 2 seats in our current building. We conducted a few second interviews for Planner 1 and Planner 2 and Planner Tech. So we just kind of went back through the list. But also with Nina transitioning from admin assistant to Planner Tech, we do need to fill out our admin staff so we can support responding to your emails and your phone calls and just all of the functions that our department needs kind of to keep the lights on, so to speak, and the front of the house operating. So we are going to be interviewing staff assistant 3s or staff assistants, I should say. I'm not sure who's on that list or what the categories are on that list, and admin assistants while we consider adding maybe 1 more planner right now while we sort through our space needs. So this is where we're at for staffing. I'm pretty excited. Lots of new staff and more on the way. Reminder, deadlines for provisional licenses. After the passage or due to the passage of the budget trailer bill last year, and then the secondary trailer bill that we saw, the provisional license timelines were really solidified and tightened up during that process. So what we've got here is for all new applications for commercial cannabis licenses, there are some exceptions for the small cultivator and equity applicants, but in general, right, if you had not received a provisional license or didn't have a provisional license is really what I should say, and you were looking to acquire a new provisional license, you really needed to apply in most cases by June 30th of this year to guarantee that you would be eligible for issuance of that provisional license by the June 30th, 2022 deadline. So After June 30th of 2022, no new provisional licenses will be issued unless you fall into one of these exception categories that we're going to talk about next. The renewal deadline, no provisional licenses are eligible for renewal according to statute after January 1st of 2025. And then no provisional licenses are allowed to be in existence after January 1st of 2026. So lots of kind of crunchy timelines to help transition folks from provisionals at the state level over to annual licenses. So going back to the timelines for application and issuance of a renewal, or application and issuance, of a provisional license. I mentioned there were a couple exceptions. There is a small cultivator exception, which allows applicants with less than 20,000 square feet of outdoor canopy, which is pretty much, everyone in our pool, right? So all 10,000 square foot cultivators in the county still have a little bit of time. 10,000 square foot or less cultivators in the county still have a little time to apply for an initial provisional license at the state. You have until June 30th to get your application in, and that is necessary in order for you to be eligible to receive a provisional license before the September 30th, 2022 deadline for issuance. So after September 30th of 2022, the state will not be issuing new provisionals for small cultivators, unless, of course, you are a local equity applicant, right? Next exception to the rules here on the timelines. So local equity applicants who meet the requirements of a local jurisdiction's local equity program where they operate and would not cause the applicant to hold multiple cultivation licenses in excess of an acre of outdoor canopy, so that's fine for Mendocino, or in excess of 22,000 square feet for mixed light or indoor, are eligible to receive a provisional license through June 30th of 2023, so long as they apply for that provisional license by March 31st of 2023. Now, there are some benchmarks of elevated CEQA requirements and resource agency requirements that come into place across this timeline. So we're seeing an elevated benchmark on July 1st of 2022. So any local equity applicant wanting to use the exception to apply by March 31st of 2023 would have to meet those elevated CEQA requirements and any elevated resource agency requirements. So these are standard deadlines, and then there's layers of kind of elevated environmental compliance that any applicant would have to fulfill in order to be eligible within these timelines. Previous presentations, including last week's presentation, does have significantly more information in it about provisional licensing renewal, the elevated CEQA requirements, their timelines for elevation, and the elevated DFW and kind of water board violation restrictions that are in statute. That is all outlined in previous presentations. I didn't repeat those slides in that detail in this presentation. But, last week's presentation does have it. So if you wanted to look back at the charts to get more information about the provisional licensing program, CEQA requirements, DFW requirements, and perhaps restrictions associated with that program, you can find that in last week's presentation. Oops, wrong button. My apologies. So let's talk a little bit about alignment, right? As we're heading into these elevated requirements, both the county is working hard with applicants and putting a priority and emphasis on alignment in many ways so that we can ensure that folks qualify to move forward and can put together a comprehensive Appendix G checklist packet. And then also what we're noticing is that the state is also doing a lot of due diligence to further alignment, right? So we're noticing that We've got some applicants and permit holders that still need to potentially align their current cultivation activities with what is stated on their application or permit, right? So making sure that if you're cultivating outdoors and mixed light, for example, that your application and or permit, depending on where you are in the process, clearly specifies that you have outdoor and mixed light cultivation. It's going to be really hard to process an Appendix G for someone cultivating outdoor when the permit and all of the materials suggest that you are a mixed light cultivator, right? So we're flagging these things. I know that it's frustrating for folks as we're like, well, wait a minute, we need to do a little cleanup. But really, the purpose of flagging things and moving through the materials to get them aligned is so we can conduct the referrals. We can put together a comprehensive and thoughtful Appendix G packet with the applicant or permit holder, and that's going to be hopefully approved and accepted by the state to get you an annual license. We're also seeing some action from the state to encourage state license alignment with the local application or permit activities stated in the local authorization framework. So again, there's a timeline for achieving your provisional license. So if you need to acquire additional state licenses because you need to be a multi-type or you choose to be a multi-type, now's the time to really start moving forward on that if you're going to be able to continue to operate as the provisional licensing program at the state level winds down and the environmental compliance requirements ramp up. So we are really, again, working with our partners at the state level to help make sure that your application materials, your permit materials align with what the state has on record so that we can do a comprehensive CEQA document review and get you all qualified and ready for an annual license. That's the goal. That's what we're all working towards, and hopefully we're working towards that together. Building permits. We know building permits can take a while, right? Building department has lots of building permits to process. There's often plan checks that come up where folks have to make corrections, and those applications take time. So we really want to encourage folks to move forward with getting your building permits. Like, start now, be making the progress. It's really important to get those building permits in place. There are some questions in the Appendix G where you are asked to disclose any additional permits that are required to make your project compliant, so to speak. Building permits are part of that compliance piece. And for those of you who are permit holders who had compliance plans to allow you to operate but not use structures associated with your project, you had a year to wrap up those building permits. The county has been pretty lenient, is what it looks like, on enforcing the 1-year limitation on those compliance plans. But those building permits have to be wrapped up. So folks, please do emphasize getting your building permits finalized and moving forward. If you are equity eligible, you can use the PBS estimate waiver form on the website to help cover the cost of those building permits, so long as they are not a Class K building permit and they're directly related to your project. They will qualify for a waiver. So please don't hesitate to move your projects forward if you are really hoping to achieve an annual license. All of these pieces need to align and congeal so we can help transition you into an annual license at the state level. Application materials. It's very important that application materials be consistent and aligned throughout the application packet. We're going to talk about that a little more in relationship to sensitive species habitat review. We do use a multitude of the application materials you submit to the department for the sensitive species habitat review. And so they really do need to align, because we're combing information out of these materials to ensure that we understand what activities and what exactly is going on and what resource usage is like at your cultivation site or your nursery site. So materials we're reviewing when conducting the internal, right, the department's initial sensitive species habitat review is, of course, the sensitive species habitat questionnaire. And if you submit a continuous expansion affidavit, we would review that as well. I apologize for not putting it on here. Cultivation and operations plan. We're using the cultivation and operations plan as a resource to really understand what the power sources are on that property that serves the cultivation or nursery project, what the water sources are on the property and how they're used. So in that cult and operations plan, we're asking for a listing of all of the water sources and their uses. So what water sources are used for domestic, say, versus cannabis irrigation or maybe just fire protection. But we are asking for all that information, and then we need that to be clearly reflected on the site plan. The site plan is crucial to the sensitive species habitat review as well. And we'll walk through the checklist that we use internally that was developed with Fish and Wildlife in just a moment, which I think will make why these resources or materials need to align a bit more apparent for folks. We also are reviewing the lake or streambed alteration agreement that we've received, or whatever documentation we've received thus far to show compliance with any required lake or streambed alteration on the project, right? So, you know, if it's your LSAA draft, that's what we're looking at here. If it's the final, it's what we're looking at. If it's the app law letter, we're probably looking at that and asking for the notification if we don't have it already. That paperwork is critical to this review, as is the notice of applicability. So all of those components are materials, application materials that we're going to open up, so to speak, and review when we're going through the sensitive species habitat review process internally. And then there's a range of tools that we use to support our internal review. And those tools include the Department of Fish and Wildlife's BIOS viewer for government. This is where we have the ability to see layers of California natural diversity database. So those layers are kind of like overlaid on aerial imagery that allows us to identify or not identify, right, that there's potentially sensitive species in the area where your project is occurring. We also utilize the BioViewer platform to search for northern spotted owl areas. There's a layer that gives us California streams, so we can look at waterways. It also provides us with wetlands, so mapped wetlands, 100-year floodplain review, and also within the CNDDB and some of the other layers, there are layers that show rare vegetation that we might need to be aware of. We also use the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services IPAC map. This is a secondary layer of endangered species review. So we're going to look at that platform as well. We're also going to look at the USGS soils map. This gives us an idea of the slopes, on and around your project and the project parcel, any sort of rare soil type. So for example, the Mendocino cypress is known to grow in a rare soil type. So it gives us some overview or insights about potential sensitive habitat areas. We use the county's PBS1 map so that we can say, this is the parcel, this is the boundaries. We can look at these other maps, which might not have the parcel specific information on it, to see where in proximity to your parcel, right, any of these rare or endangered or habitats of concern might be occurring. The PBS1 map also helps us with zoning verification. There is a waterways and wetlands setting on there, so we use it to kind of double verify what we're seeing on the BIOS viewer platform. And then also, because BIOS doesn't have parcel boundaries, we like to make sure that we put together or do a screenshot of your parcel map off of PBS1 and get that to DFW. Should you be referred, that gets added to the packet that goes off to DFW in many cases, so that they actually know where the boundaries of your parcel project start and end, right? It's really helpful. We're also using the county's permit tracking system known as Trackit to just verify building permits and verify any materials that you may have previously submitted, and just make sure that we're tidying everything up and reviewing any notes that may have come in before completing our review, and definitely before sending anything off for referral. And then there's additional tools that we might use as necessary and applicable. Sometimes Google Earth is super helpful, depending on the time of day, the day of the year, right? What was happening with the weather. Various aerial imagery resources can provide us with better imagery than other resources. So we might, again, choose to use additional tools as necessary to help provide clarity and better maps or visuals to just better understand what's occurring on the ground and to conduct our review. And then we use what we call the Exhibit A Performance Standard Checklist, which we're going to walk through. I put it all into slides, and we're just going to walk through it so you guys can all see what, what it looks like. It visually looks a little different because it's not shades of green, right? It's just a black and white kind of boring checklist. But essentially, all of the information that we review has been put into these slides so we can talk a little bit about them. So a referral occurs when staff identifies the inability or the unknown ability, right, for the project to meet any one of these performance standard requirements. So if we conduct a review and all of the answers are yes, the review is done and no referral is necessary. But if in conducting the performance standard review, any of the boxes are answered no or are unknown to department staff, the materials are packaged up and sent off to the California Department of Fish and Wildlife for further consideration. So, AKA the referral occurs. So starting off here, we're checking for notices of violation. So if you meet the performance standard, if no notice of violation has been issued by CDFW for the parcel, or if a notice of violation was issued for the parcel, you can meet the performance standard by providing the information that shows that DFW has provided you written verification stating that the violation has been resolved. If you have an outstanding notice of violation from CDFW, it would trigger a referral to CDFW. So also, there's no obvious violations of Fish and Game Code or unpermitted activities that would require a permit from Fish and Wildlife. And so what we're doing here is we're looking to see, is there anything obvious, right? When we're doing our imagery review, are there any obvious violations that we can identify or unpermitted activities that look like they would require a lake and stream alteration agreement? If the answer to that is there's no obvious violations that we've identified, we move on to the next step. If the answer is no, or it's unknown, this would trigger a referral. And even if the first one triggers a referral, we go all the way through the checklist to identify which performance standards are met, which performance standards are not met, and which performance standards we just don't know the answer to that question on. So we just keep going and we review each and every one of these. This is where the continuous expansion affidavit fits in. So there is a performance standard that asks the question, you meet the performance standard according to this if the project footprint has not expanded and is not proposed for expansion. So if you are eligible and choose to submit a contiguous expansion affidavit that the county can confirm or verify based on the materials you've submitted, and you have expanded, right? That continuous expansion affidavit provides an exemption from item 3 here, right? So if you expanded in a contiguous manner within the parameters of the CEA, right? The continuous expansion affidavit materials, we would say, yes, you meet this performance standard. You submitted those materials and it qualified as contiguous expansion. We would say, yes, you met this performance standard, and we would move on. The sensitive species habitat review questionnaire does ask this question: if grading, tree removal, or vegetation removal has occurred after January 1st of 2016. So when we're conducting a sensitive species habitat review, the BIOS viewer is in 2-year increments. So we can see what the parcel looked like sometimes before 2016, but definitely in 2016, and then in 2018, and then in 2020. And soon here, probably in January of 2023, we'll have 2022 data on that parcel viewer as well, or that BIOS viewer. So part of the process here in reviewing item 4's performance standards is looking through those consecutive years to see if there's any identifiable vegetation modification or grading. And then if we see vegetation modification, there's 2 pieces that happen here, right? Or we see tree removal. This gets a no, they're not meeting that performance standard, and it's subject to referral. But also if we're noticing any sort of what looks like tree removal or vegetation modification, we're going to send a letter, as many of you know, and ask you to help us identify which species may have been modified or removed and when that activity occurred. So, and then grading. Grading is a requirement to show all areas that are graded and disturbed on your site plan. And we do diligently come back and ask folks to clarify that and make sure it's on their site plan. It is necessary for moving forward with this part of the review, and definitely assist Fish and Wildlife when they're conducting their review. If there's a referral, to have the applicant have identified any grading on that site plan. It's incredibly helpful, so it's why we do come back and continually ask for it. I believe grading is also outlined on the site plan requirements as an item that must be included in your site plan. But it helps us conduct this review, which is part of the reason why it's so gosh darn important. For projects that have a surface water diversion or are using surface water as a source of water for cultivation, domestic use, or other consumption, we also need to look at the stream crossings and other activities that are subject to 1602. So again, part of the reason for asking for all water sources is that surface water diversions and the applicant's compliance with Fish and Wildlife or Fish and Game Code Section 1602 is part of our environmental review process. It's folded into the sensitive species habitat review. And the sensitive species habitat review is meant to ensure that the performance standards outlined in some of the performance standards, right, that were outlined in the mitigated negative declaration are implemented, and that the project is compliant with those performance standards to ensure that that project has a less than significant impact on the environment. So again, right, we're looking at the LSAA information, and then technically we're not supposed to allow for the renewal of an issued permit if over the course of that 1-year period that the cultivation or nursery permit is valid, the applicant doesn't move from, say, a notification or a draft LSA into a final LSAA. So really, folks, wrapping up those LSAA materials as soon as you can, just getting into that final LSAA is pretty critical to continuing to move these permits and applications forward. We are looking at whether or not the project meets the following stream and wetland setbacks. So a minimum of 150 feet from perennial streams and wetlands and a minimum of 50 feet from intermittent streams. This is measured from the outer edge of the riparian vegetation or top of the bank, whichever is greater, and those areas should be identified and maintained as no disturbance buffers. This is generally a little bit of a challenge in communication, sometimes between the department and our applicants. The stream and wetland setbacks, while in the ordinance, that requirement has not made it onto the site plan guidance document. And we do plan to update that, and we had updated it before the portal, but it created a lot of stress for applicants. So we just retracted it and went with what had been published for quite a while. But many of you ask why we come back and ask for these streams and wetland setbacks to be identified on your site plan. And this is really why, right? Because when they're identified on the site plan, that site plan goes to Fish and Wildlife. Fish and Wildlife can use it to conduct their review, just like we would use it to conduct our review of this item. It can stay off, say, if you're referred out, requests for site visits, right? So when we're putting these buffer zones onto our site plans, right, and we can confirm them via aerial and satellite imagery, it reduces the likelihood of us needing to come out and conduct a site visit just to do these measurements. So really, this is an important component of the review. If there's an unknown ability, right, because there's no buffers on your site plan for us to view, but we recognize a waterway because it pops on PBS1 map and or the BIOS viewer map. We're going to say it's unknown. We don't have a site plan that shows these setbacks. It's unknown whether or not they meet these standards, and the application materials will go for referral. For projects with existing or proposed ponds, this is where the bullfrog management plan comes into place. The bullfrog management plan has to appear feasible and include sufficient detail, right? So not only the department, but if it goes to referral to DFW, the resource agency understands the plan for identifying and eliminating bullfrog population as a control mechanism. So a little bit more information here. And we've also copied this information right from this review guidance document into the checklist for the portal most recently. Additionally, we're reviewing each and every site for its location in association with a 100-year floodplain. If the site is identified as being within the 100-year floodplain, a referral occurs. And we're almost done with this. I'm sorry, I know this is probably a little sleepy, boring, but we're just about through the performance standards. We have one more slide after this, but I think it's important that folks just know what we're reviewing. So we also review the project. The project is supposed to completely avoid impacts to oak woodlands and provide an adequate protection buffer between oak woodlands and project activities. Fortunately, this is an overlay in some of the mapping systems. So it's basically if the project is within the overlay, it's going to trigger a referral. And so we do rely on the overlay resources in the mapping tools that we utilize to respond to this. The cultivation site, if the cultivation site is located within a quarter mile of a known spotted owl center, activity center, or forested habitat that's contiguous to a known activity center, we're supposed to refer your application to DFW for further consideration. So we do use the tools that identify spotted owl, northern spotted owl activity centers, and then we can pull a quarter-mile ring on it and see if you're in that proximity. For projects using artificial light, including security lighting, you must also submit a light containment plan, also known as an artificial light management plan. So we're reviewing those in relationship to this as well. As are we reviewing noise management plans and really looking at how noise associated with generators and other combustion engine-based machinery may impact habitat in and around your project parcel. So this is why we're asking for the noise management plan. Again, we have added the guidance of both the light management plan and the noise management plan to the checklist. So if you go to the portal page, we updated that checklist before opening the corrections portal. There's some additional guidance. This language is there as well for you to review. Okay, wrapping up the checklist here. We are reviewing to see if you meet the standards to protect fish and wildlife and if you are in compliance with the State Water Resource Control Board's cannabis policy. So cannabis cultivators shall only use geotextiles, fiber rolls, and other erosion control measures made of loose weave mesh, fiber, or from other products without welded weaves. And then to minimize the risk of ensnaring and strangling wildlife, cannabis cultivators shall not use synthetic monofilament netting materials for erosion control for any cannabis cultivation activities. So the prohibition does include photo or biodegradable plastic nettings. So we have some of these questions are built into the Colton Ops Plan. Again, part of the reason why we send the Colton Ops Plan is some of these questions, such as security lighting, how you manage erosion at your site, right? These are built into the Colton Ops Plan and help us comb out the answers to how erosion might be managed at your site, right, in this example. And then also, as I mentioned earlier, we use the California Department of Fish and Wildlife BioViewer to look at the California Native or Natural Diversity Database, otherwise known as CNDDB database. And this really provides us with, your parcel, and then are there any overlays that show us that sensitive species, flora and or fauna, are potentially located on the project parcel or in the vicinity of the project parcel. If there is what we would call a sensitive species hit on the CNDDB layering system, we would refer your project to California Department of Fish and Wildlife through the referral process for the sensitive species habitat review here. So we run through all of these, and as I mentioned, if all of the answers are yes, we're like, great. We package up the materials that we put together, including the checklist here, and we get it off to the applicant and or their agent or the permit holder, depending on where you are in the process when you actually have this review conducted, and give you those materials so that your Appendix G can be shaped in a manner that's consistent with those materials. And this is going to be most relevant when it comes to the biological resources section of the Appendix G, but depending on the project, there may be information that's relevant to other sections, especially if we have to do a referral, right? So If staff finds that the answer to any of the performance standard questions we just ran through is a no or unknown, then the sensitive species habitat review, as I mentioned, is referred to California Department of Fish and Wildlife for additional consideration and review. And then we take all the materials and we package them for Fish and Wildlife. The completed checklist that we just, talked about, that I broke up into the slides. We send the questionnaire, we send the continuous expansion affidavit if there's one, Calton ops plan, site plan, lake or streambed alteration agreement, or whatever paperwork we've received to confirm and verify compliance with the resource agency's cannabis permitting requirements. And we send the notice of applicability. And what should be on this list is we often also send the parcel map, a screenshot of how the parcel is shaped and what it looks like on our PBS1 platform. When this occurs, department staff will be notifying you and your agent that your sensitive species habitat review resulted in a referral and that your materials have either been sent out or are being sent out soon come. CDFW reviews generally take 30 days. So you should always plan for at least 30 days for that review to happen at CDFW if you are subject to a referral. And then when the comments come back, it generally takes staff a little bit of time to read the comments and go through them, figure out what next steps look like, and then package those materials of the comments and the materials like the entire referral packet that we sent to DFW. We then package those materials together and get that over to the agent and the applicant for their consideration. So this is important because sometimes you want to read what came back from DFW. Please always do that. And sometimes the comments have additional actions or requests from CDFW for additional materials, potentially a site inspection. We've seen a number of variations come back. And so it's really the applicant's responsibility to, if they have any questions about what CDFW is asking, to reach out to CDFW and ask for clarification, but also to meet the requirements that are in that comment section, and then get those back to CDFW and the department as soon as possible so that additional review can be conducted. Now, this is really important because the department, MCD, our cannabis department here in the county, is not supposed to issue a permit if there's the inability to clear the sensitive species habitat review with the result that says the project is going to have less than significant impacts. CDFW often has suggestions, and their preference really is to keep folks in the system and to reduce the impacts. So their goal with the comments and the additional materials really are to figure out if there's a way for your project to meet the less than significant impacts threshold necessary for you to qualify for a permit from the county and move forward into an annual license. So you're going to want to read those comments. Sometimes they ask for a biological survey. Sometimes they're like, we just have a lot of questions and want to come out for a site inspection, right? So, county staff can help you coordinate. And if you have contact information, you can reach out to cannabisprogram@mendocinocounty.org. But it's really important to review not just the comment sheet, but the entire packet, right? Maybe you're going to catch something that we didn't catch. So maybe comments come back and you're like, well, wait a minute. They're asking me about stuff that's on my neighbor's parcel, right? Right? Let's have a conversation about that. So we do our review before we send the comments out for you and out to you and try to catch those things. But it's important for the applicants and the agents to review these materials as well to make sure that, what was reviewed is accurate. Again, this brings us back to alignment, right? It's so important to make sure that your cultivation and operations plan, your site plan, all of the materials that we're going to consider in our initial review that might go to CDFW for a referral process truly reflects the operations that are occurring, right? Nothing is kind of more of a bummer than spending all of this time doing a review and a referral, and then the applicants, but I changed this. And then we're like, oh gosh darn it, we're back to square one, right? Kind of reevaluating. So again, the department's putting a lot of emphasis on consistency and alignment with your application materials, getting them wrapped up. Really, that is the way we can streamline these reviews internally. And again, this is everything from making sure that your power sources that you're utilizing for your cultivation and nursery operations is clearly reflected on that cultivation and operations plan. They are shown if they're necessary, such as, right, where's your solar, where's that generator stored? All of these are considerations that come into play with the environmental review. They must be consistent and they must be identified so we can do our job here at the department. And if a referral occurs, the FW can do their job without spending a lot of time kicking the materials back and forth between the department, the applicant, the department, right, to try to get the answers. So alignment. When we do have comments that come in, like I said, and they say that, this project will result in less than significant impacts to the environment, right? You're good to go, right? We package up those comments, we give you the materials that we send for that referral, and really that's the information you need to move forward with your Appendix G checklist, and really specifically the biological section, but it could be relevant, say, to the hydrology section. So if you are in proximity of a floodplain and DFW had questions about the hydrological connectivity of a well or a water source that you're using, right? The studies that you might go through, the inspections you might go through during the sensitive species habitat review will provide answers to those questions and give you additional information to support your final CEQA document, not only maybe in the biological section, but in the hydrological section, you might be able to say close proximity to the floodplain, but also the wells or the water sources were determined to be non-hydrologically connected. This is an example, right? But just trying to thread the needle a bit here about how all of these materials are interrelated and how the sensitive species habitat review process, both internally and any referral that may occur, is crucial and critical to that Appendix G checklist that you'll be submitting to the department, or that will be eventually potentially working with you to draft on your behalf. So with that said, we have a ton of questions in the Q&A. We have one hand raised, and I think what we want to do is go to public comment and see if we can knock out some questions. The presentation is meaty. It did take some time to get through all of the review considerations that we have going on in the department and with Fish and Wildlife for this item. So I don't know that we'll get through all of the questions. I do want to encourage folks that if you are wanting to make a verbal comment and or ask a question, to please raise your hand. You can use the raise hand feature if you're on the Zoom app. That's generally at the bottom of your screen or the top of your screen, depending on how you have your toolbar set up. And if you're calling in from a device and not using the Zoom app, you can use *9, excuse me, to raise your hand or to lower your hand. We want to make sure we get through verbal comments today, so I think we'll do things a little bit different. I think we'll start by going to Paul Hansberry and Susan Tibbin, who do have their hand raised. Do feel free to raise your hand. So we'll start off by hearing from Paul and Susan, and then we'll hear from Monique Ramirez afterwards. And then we'll filter in questions that have come into the chat, depending on how many hands go up as we move through this process of Q&A. So give me just a moment to get, pardon me, the timer up. And I do need a drink of water. So we're going to pause for just a second here. All right. I think we're ready to hear some public comment. So I am going to go ahead and allow Paul and Susan to unmute their device and start their comment, please.
Hi, Kristen. Thanks very much. There's a lot to unpack in what you just presented, but let me see if I can ask a few questions. First, can the fee waiver process be expedited for building permits since it's guaranteed for qualified applicants? For instance, can they show their acceptance letter and automatically get the process going so it doesn't have to go through all the different approval processes for the fee waiver? If they just show that, then they can continue and all your background stuff can go, the bureaucracy can continue in the background. I'm wondering how well does Trackit work for Mendocino employees? Because I and many of the people that I've spoken to find it very difficult to use and navigate and frustrating and outdated. I'm also wondering what's the difference between tree removal and vegetation modification. Seems to me that in the ordinance, they just talk about tree removal for commercial species and significant damage, not necessarily removal. But I just wanted to weigh in on that. And agriculture is permitted on the 100-year floodplain, and what are the restrictions for cannabis? I'll stop at that. Thank you.
All right. I don't know the answer to expediting the process with PBS. We have been having conversations with them about what that timeline looks like and if there's ways to trim any of the timing off. Trackit is not necessarily designed for this type of cannabis permitting. So we are using a combination internally of Trackit and spreadsheets to manage projects coming in, assignment flow, and looking at other options, just to be completely transparent, to handle our kind of workflow on the back end, our permit tracking, both internally and for the public, as well as to ensure that we have an adequate application portal system for all application types that might be coming into the department. So I don't have all the answers there. It just wasn't designed to do what we want it to do. So again, we are looking at other options. Tree removal and vegetation modification. The tree removal prohibition in the ordinance is pretty narrow, as Paul mentioned. We chose to use the terms vegetation modification, not just because of the questions about vegetation modification in the performance standard review that we just looked at, or checklist that we just looked at, but also because we felt that it might be overly pointed to suggest that an applicant or permit holder had removed trees when we don't really know for sure. We're asking for more information. So they are sort of the same review process where we're asking you to identify what vegetation has been modified, whether it's been a commercial species, a true oak or a tan oak, and when that modification occurred, so that we can screen the application for the purposes of the sensitive species habitat review, but also for the tree clearing prohibition. Agriculture in the 100-year floodplain, what they're really concerned about here in this performance standard checklist is permanent structures within the floodplain. So like your shed, right? Your ag chemical storage shed should not be built in the floodplain. So you might also be limited to outdoor cultivation in the floodplain. And this really is, we're going to take the lead of Fish and Wildlife on this, but we have had Fish and Wildlife ask folks to move their hoop houses up and over to the other side of their garden and their outdoor closer to the floodplain in order to meet this performance standard, and to rearrange where they store agricultural chemicals. So those are outside of the floodplain, for example. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to hear from our next caller, who is going to be Monique Ramirez, followed by Michael Katz, and then Amy Nguyen. Whoops, sorry, I just did that incorrectly. Give me just one more minute here. Apologies. We are going to go to Monique Ramirez. You should be able to unmute your device and start your comment, please.
Good morning. Thank you so much for the meeting. A few questions. One pertaining to Appendix G. I'm just curious when applications that have been submitted prior to the portal even opening are going to be resumed by the assigned planners, because I know you've mentioned before that that's been pushed back. And I'm just curious if you can give an timeline, and also what the projected timeline is for renewal applications right now that have been submitted to be processed by the county, because I feel like there's been a lot more scrutiny being done on a bunch of people's permit applications. And so I'm curious what that timeline is looking like. I know you guys have requested us to submit 60 days in advance of a renewal permit expiration date. However, some people may not have gotten materials turned in until maybe 30 days or something. And so just curious if you can speak to those timelines. I feel like I didn't get enough clarification from Paul's comment about the difference between vegetation modification removal as well as tree removal. And if you could just speak to the type of vegetation that is a concern. Anything is a disturbance. Living in the world is a disturbance. So I'm just curious, how far are we going to take this? To a grass level, to poison oak, manzanita? There's so many types of vegetation out there. And I'm just curious if you can speak to what the department is really concerned about, and more so the Department of Fish and Wildlife. When I went to the county office recently and spoke to a planner, I said, we need to remove poison oak to get that out of the way for our CAL FIRE clearance. And the planner specifically stated that poison oak was not a concern of the county, but to please document it with photographs. So my partner has done that. So I just want to really get clarity on that. So thank you so much.
All right, I will try to knock off a few of these. I want to make sure that I don't talk for too long so that we have a chance to get through all of the folks who have who are in the queue. Right now we are working on I'll call it our dispatch process, right? And so this is important information for any kind of application you're submitting. So as I mentioned, when talking about Track It in response to Paul's question, it doesn't really do everything we need it to do, and it's not meant to manage this type of program. And so the ability to assign and track who has various materials of an applicant's under review, or multiple applications, or whose application under review in Track It is hard to visually track if you're the individual dispatching workflow to the planners and the planner techs and our staff in office. So we have made our own system. And so we've spent a bunch of time, and especially Angie has been crushing it. She's been stuck on the forensic study and distribution of materials project that we've had going on for about 2 months now, where we've been trying to get every single application that's under review currently, right, that is actively being reviewed is what I should say. So that might be a renewal, a modification, it might be portal is in its own bucket of review, right? That's a pretty easy assignment piece. And so the way we assign portal reviews is by having all of those projects on a spreadsheet, and then we assign them in the order they were received. And so we're now taking that process that worked really well for the planners, and we're duplicating it for everything else, right? So that means when your application comes in via the cannabis program, it gets flagged for a planner of the day. That planner of the day then takes that application, does an initial review, gets it set up into a folder for assignment, right? New documents need to be reviewed for this AG number are now in a folder, and I can assign the folder. And I know how to and when to assign the folder because we've had the planners over the last several months put every single thing they're working on currently onto a tracking spreadsheet. Every new application that comes on goes onto that tracking spreadsheet. So right now, Angie is moving all of the Appendix Gs that we received onto that spreadsheet. So this now gives us the ability to see how long it's taking roughly to process applications, who has what applications in-house, when they came in, whether or not they're paid, right? And to prioritize assigning those applications. So as soon as we get the Appendix Gs onto that spreadsheet, which I imagine we'll have done probably by Wednesday or so of next week. Wow, it's like hyper fast video catch up there. Sorry about that. That was really weird. So we will then be able to pair the assigning of those Appendix Gs, say, with renewals that we either have in progress or are assigning. So we're, building the system because Trackit doesn't really do that for us. Projected timeline for renewals. We are focused on cleanup, as I've mentioned. Many of you have experienced that with us. And as far as the additional level of scrutiny, there are some anomalies that have moved forward, and I can't speak to why there's been discrepancies between, say what's allowed in the ordinance and what someone has in their permit packet, right? That's history that I don't want to dredge up nor speak ill about. But in order to move forward with the Appendix G process and getting folks annual licenses, which is our goal here, we need to make sure that your application packet truly reflects the activities you have on the ground, that it meets the performance standards and the requirements in the ordinance, and that we can put together or work with you to receive and review a comprehensive CEQA document that, again, aligns with what we have in our files. So I can't get into the nitty gritty of vegetation versus tree removal. Vegetation and the concerns around vegetation removal or modification, and I'm speaking solely outside of the tree clearing prohibition in the ordinance. We're asked to identify that. DFW will weigh in on whether or not they have concerns about that. Sometimes they will ask for certain hedgerows or shrubbery to not be pruned, say, during a specified time of the year because it's known for various nesting birds. I mean, that's just one thing that I've seen. So, we identify it. Fish and Wildlife may ask more questions about it. We're managing the tree clearing prohibition that's in the ordinance. So I don't think I can get more in depth in the short time frame we have here, but it is a topic that we could talk about more in depth in the future. We'll go to Michael Katz, followed by Amy Nguyen, and then Hannah Nelson. After Hannah, we've got Corinne Powell and Marie Livesey. I think we can get through everyone on here. I don't know if we'll get past folks that have their hands raised in the queue. Sincere apologies for that. But with that said, we'll go to Michael Katz, and I'll try to keep my responses brief. You should be able to unmute and start your comment, Mr. Katz.
Good morning. Thanks so much for the meeting. Checking in a couple of things that you said earlier at the top of the meeting. Wondering if related to the true up, if there's any updates on movement in creating a payment plan for operators to enter into prior to May 31st so that they don't lose access to using equity funds for then paying those taxes if they're having trouble putting those funds together. Wondering if there's an update on the status of the contractor RFQ, as for the folks that would be hired as contractors, not necessarily working within the office, but being able to still do review of a lot of the stuff that needs to happen. And then finally, what's the process that determines what are the maps and different cross-referenced items that are used for the SSHR? I saw, there's a large list of the different items that are checked to see if there might be something there. And what is the minimum standard for those requirements? Are we doing the minimum? Are we doing more than the minimum? And how is that determined? And how can we make that the most streamlined and the bare minimum requirements possible. Thank you.
Okay, lots of questions. See if we can get through them. I just want to be absolutely clear that if you miss your ability or the timeline for the May 31st waiver, right, for your true up, it doesn't eliminate your ability to use true ups to pay taxes. You can still use, it doesn't eliminate your ability to use waivers to still pay taxes. So if you become delinquent for some reason with your 2021 true up, we can't use LEAP monies to pay that delinquent true up, but you can still use LEAP waivers to pay 2022 quarterly taxes. We have had some email communications going around between TTC, County Council, and the department about a payment plan. However, it's going to take an ordinance change. It's not going to happen before Tuesday. It's just not humanly possible. So, and whether or not there's a payment plan does not ensure that we could use the LEAP monies to pay those payment plan costs, right? So let's talk about process really quick here so we can just kind of hopefully clear the air. The county has the opportunity to make a proposal to GoBiz for the purpose of using waiver funds, LEAP funds, equity funds for delinquent taxes. However, we have to make the argument that delinquent taxes are somehow a startup and or ongoing expense, right? Pretty hard right now to make an argument that delinquent taxes are an ongoing or startup expense, especially when the applicant's ability to participate in the application and permitting program has not been determined by tax status. Now, let's look forward. We have directive from the board to prioritize the review of applications that have DCC compliance, application or licensing, and have tax compliance. So we're also moving forward with, largely led by County Council because it looks like we need an ordinance change, and TTC, this consideration for the development of a payment plan. And I do believe that if we can get a payment plan on the books and some sort of penalty relief, and the payment plan is monthly or quarterly payments, we have a great opportunity to go back to GoBiz and say, yep, the board gave us directive to prioritize the processing of applications associated with folks who are current on their taxes and not technically delinquent. And look, we have this payment plan. People are entering into the payment plan. They're paying monthly or quarterly. That is now an ongoing expense associated with their ability to continue being active in this program. And I think we can make that argument, see what the state says. But the best thing to do is to have the program for any sort of payment plan and or penalty relief solidified so we can provide a robust proposal for consideration, which will help our shot of getting that approved. Because right now we were told no, unless we had some way of making a brilliant argument that delinquent taxes were part of an ongoing business expense. Okay, enough of that. RFQ date. We are still managing the rewrite. It is out with the consultants doing formatting. I expect to know more next week. Process that determines which tools are used. A lot of the tools that we are using are tools that are provided to government agencies to help conduct environmental review. This is why we are using those tools. They were also recommended by Fish and Wildlife. And we're just looking for clearance, right? So basically our review is if there's no sensitive species on that parcel or parcels where the project is located, we just move on to the next, right? If there's species noted, for example, we know that there's species and we move on to our next review standard. So I don't know how else to respond to that, so I'm going to leave that there. We're going to go to our next caller. We're going to run late on time here, so hopefully folks don't mind staying a little bit so we can get through Marie Livesley. It's going to be our last speaker this morning. Anyways, I apologize. Miss Amy Nguyen, you should be able to unmute your device and start your comment. Amy, did you still have a comment or a question for us? You have been provided permission to talk, and so you should be able to unmute your device. Okay, we will be going on to Hannah Nelson, followed by Corinne Powell, and then Marie Livesley will wrap us up for today. So Hannah, you should be able to unmute your device and start your question or your comment.
Thank you very much. Forgive my voice, I'm still a little bit sick. If someone needs to change permit sizes or types at this point, and aside from renewals, which is a straightforward mechanism, what is the best way for them to do that now? Assume that they are eligible for a provisional and they need to do a local change before they can do a state license. What is the best mechanism? And how are we dealing with the chicken and the egg part of that? Additionally, in a similar vein with alignment of state licenses and portal submission, if somebody changed license permit application types in the portal, and then they provided proof of a new application to the state, but that's being held up because the local authorization is not deemed to be complete by the state now. Will they be considered out of compliance, and how is that being handled by the county if they've done everything they can, but the delay is due to this kind of interplay between the state and where things are at in the local process? And finally, farming is a really seasonal and dynamic endeavor. And what is the department's advice on how to handle small changes and with vis-a-vis CEQA, with respect to CEQA, and especially the checklist, is a snapshot, but small changes are allowed. And how can we best achieve consistency and alignment, but also allow for changes that don't impact the conclusion that there's a less than significant impact? Thank you. Sorry.
All right. Glad you're on the mend. I don't know that I can answer all of these questions today, Hannah. I think some of them probably need a little more dialogue to make sure that I fully understand the context of your question, and we aren't going to have time to get through it today. But I can say this: if you need to change your permit type, your size, and or your permit type, really a modification application is triggered, and that's what you should be submitting. For folks who made that change in the portal, when we receive a local authorization, the department does, it comes to me. If I look and see what that applicant status is, and if I know that they're in the portal and I'm seeing a misalignment, I'm going to look at that portal submission to see if a modification was applied for, say in like the 2021 portal, and we can, allow local authorization for something that's not in Trackit, perhaps, right? So we are double checking the multiple layers of materials we have in-house. It's not ideal, it's a little time consuming, but we are doing it to try to help streamline, ensure that especially folks who completed via the first portal, have the ability to receive local authorization if they clarified, say that they have outdoor and mixed light, but we have traditionally only had them listed as a mixed light. Just an example. Small changes that don't require a modification, right, can be captured during renewal. They can also be, if you are under review with us, be submitted via email or notified via email. Ideally, we'll get to an application system where you can do all of your notifications and updates through your user portal. Oh my gosh, I can't wait for that day, but we aren't there yet. So again, I think really, if you have questions about small changes that might not trigger a modification application and how to manage that, please do get those off to us. Part of what we're doing with the spreadsheet is really looking at what we've got in-house for modifications. We're going to start busting through those at least with enough of a preliminary review to get plan check, notes back to the applicant as necessary. But also just so that we can adjust if there is a permit and permit change, whether it's a size and or a type change, that we start getting those noted in Trackit so that it's easier for the state. But as I mentioned before, we are still wrapping up our dispatch organization program is what I think I would like to call it. I noticed that Amy Wynn's hand is back up. So Amy will try to get you in after Marie. We're going to go next to Corinne Powell, followed by Marie Livesley, and then Amy Wynn. And that's going to wrap us up today, folks. I'm so sorry we aren't going to get to everyone. Glad we started with verbal questions. Okay, Corinne, we have allowed you to unmute your device, so you should be able to go ahead and start your comment or ask your question.
Thank you, Kristen. Two categories of concern. The first one is we all realize that the Board of Supervisors is most interested in the tax revenue generated by the cannabis industry in the county. And I hope some of them are listening. I don't know how we know that or not, but it's clear from listening to your presentation that the level of regulatory review and information processing seems to have exploded since we originally started back in 2017. Mercifully, I am through the process, but I can't imagine starting it anew. I simply cannot. And I would recommend, if the supervisors are listening, that they would reconsider the arbitrariness of dates in the sunsetting that was included in the original ordinance. We have reports back from Emerald Competitions as how superlative product is from here, with the potential for nobody coming into the program because it's so complex. I think we should appreciate those who are in it. I also want to say that it is a disadvantage for those of us trying to use and resubmit Appendix G until we hear more from you, Kristen, about the plan of having the department process or having the applicant still responsible with the help of a consultant. Can you please shed more light on processing Appendix G resubmittals? Thank you.
Okay. Processing Appendix G resubmittals are the same as processing the initial. So the only difference is when you have a resubmittal, it's going to go directly to the planner that was working with you on it. And as far as our plans to go ahead and start drafting those Appendix Gs, we're talking about a couple different strategies still internally and with County Council. We aren't ready to do it yet, but I can guarantee you that when we do become ready to do that, if we become ready to do that, and I would say the if is, like a narrow if, we will make sure that folks who've been working with consultants and want to submit their Appendix G based on a consultant or an outside of the department preparer, we will definitely still accept those. And then, and we'll probably have to put together a system by which applicants and permit holders can declare whether they want to take on the preparer role themselves with the help or not help of a consultant, and whether or not the department will be doing it. So our strategy has been talking about everything from, do we just craft the project description, which seems to be what folks have the most challenge with, is meeting all of the requirements in the state's project description guidance document. But again, we're onboarding a ton of people. We've got a heck of a lot of trainings occurring just to get through the application review. And we're still sorting through how we can be most effective and helpful when it comes to Appendix Gs. And I think as far as removing the sunsetting dates, really please do bring that comment to the board. That is a pretty hefty ordinance change and may also have some entanglement in the MND. And then appreciating those who are in the program. We really do appreciate all of you who are in the program. But we also have a lot of permits that were issued without complete application materials, without completing referrals, without complete environmental review. And part of appreciating all of you who are in the program is that we're diligently working with applicants to get that all tidied up, because without getting that all tidied up, it's going to be really hard for us to assist you in being eligible for an annual license. And that's our goal, right? Like, we don't want to issue permits. Department staff really does not want to issue permits or move people forward who are not going to be viable at the state license level. It just feels out of integrity and really unfair to folks. So I know it's a painful process to have to come in fully into compliance with what's in the ordinance and state requirements. But, you know, we need to do it together. Okay, we're going to go to Marie, and then we'll hear from Amy, and then we'll wrap it up. So Marie, you should be able to unmute your device and tell us your comment or ask your question.
Good morning. Are you hearing me, Kristen?
I am now, yes. Yes, you're a little crackly, but I think we got you.
Okay. All right, well, I hope this comes in clear enough. This is about application processing and processing time. And I think I want to start with the Appendix G that you received accepted from me in January, because the process was so smooth. I was notified that it was received. I also knew then that it had been opened because a prior one, you were not able to open it, and that it was in the check. Now, you also have on April, so that one went really smooth and very well, very professional. I sent in 2 reapplications for permits on 4/20, and they expire on 6/2. They're not yet with a planner, and I'm currently waiting to hear from the department that I resent them, and I'm currently waiting to hear from the department if they're able to be opened and if you have them. And also, I'm in limbo as to what to do.
Okay, is that it for your comments, Marie? And can I mute you? Okay, great.
Yes.
Okay, so I will respond to those. Give me just a second here to do a little maintenance and manage myself. Okay, so Appendix G's, we do conduct just an initial review that, you know, we look at it, we're like, does it look like high level glance that everything's in this packet? Great. Is the template and track changes? Great. Do we have supplemental materials with page numbers and table of contents? Great. We email you back and say, we've received your Appendix G materials and we are moving them into the queue for review. And we'll let you know when we assign them to a planner. So all of those materials were then moved into a folder that says awaiting planner assignment. And now Angie is setting them up into assignable folders and getting them onto the checklist so that we can truly actually assign them in our new dispatch program. Renewals. Marie, you're probably going to get a letter from us. The renewals had been going into a renewal folder as well. And then we had highlighted a heck of a lot of them that were coming in the group-wise platform. And we had more renewals than we have Appendix Gs, and more, you know, just kind of partial application materials, such as like a modification or a transfer reassignment, or so we had a lot of stuff filed in our group-wise folders, and some of that was unfiled and unsorted when we did the transition to Outlook. Angie's been forensically going through the Outlook emails, now that we're in Outlook, trying to comb all these materials out. And so we have a few folks who show that they've paid, because we did an export out of Trackit. We're like, okay, we have all these people who paid. Now we need to reconcile it over here and make sure we have all their materials. So we do have a few people who have payments showing in Trackit that we don't have materials from. And I think, Marie, we have one of your renewals and we're having a hard time finding the other. So Angie is queuing some emails to folks where we have mismatched payments and materials. and or we have materials, but we don't have any payment. So we apologize that it's taken us a while to do responses. Like I said, we had filed these materials thinking we were going to have planner of the day go through and do the uploads and the responses. It turned into much more of a forensic project than we had ever anticipated endeavoring into. So bear with us. We are so close. I think we've got all the renewals and the modifications. Sensitive species habitat reviews that came in recently, or AQMDs, also went onto that, so they can be assigned, as time allows, but definitely that they're assigned when we look at that application, whether it's for renewal or modification or for a permit review for issuance. So you can always email us if you have questions. We're trying to get back to folks on those, but again, we're just wrapping up our forensic investigation and filing after our transition. I think it's been almost 2 weeks into Outlook. So it just took all of our materials that were nicely filed and like exploded them everywhere. And so we're almost done. We're almost done. Thank goodness. And thank goodness for Angie. So I know that doesn't clarify fully, Marie, and I apologize, but you know how to email us, and so let us know. And if you don't hear from us over the course of next week, because we are prepping at least one letter to you, let us know, and we'll definitely make sure we get all your materials into the queue. We have both of your applications on the list for assignment. We're just struggling with some of the materials. Okay, we will go to Amy Nguyen, and then we're going to go ahead and close our session. So Amy, let's give it a shot again. I see your device and you have unmuted. Great.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. I've been kicked out of the Zoom a couple of times because of poor internet, so sorry about that. My question was in the chat, so you can ignore my chat question. This is my question. When you're reviewing the SSHR and you've got your cheat sheet that you're utilizing, there was question 3 that kind of rolls into question 4, or item 3 that rolls into item 4 in my mind, where it's asking the question about has any vegetation been removed, and I know that the goal is to look for any trees that have been removed and also potential impact to habitat for species. But when an applicant has been given the ability to relocate a portion of their operation and then they've done that, how does that tie into any vegetation modification that might have occurred in order to perform that relocation? I'm sorry, I totally forget the term, but it's an above board process that you guys have. But what's for me for filling out the Appendix G and the project description and any of our biomaterials, like how do we tie that in, the potential veg removal and the relocation that may be permitted? Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, definitely. So I think, this is why getting the materials back from the county and or CDFW first is helpful, because if we're just identifying vegetation modification and we don't see any clear violation of the tree clearing prohibition, we're just going to say, look, there was some vegetation modification that happened here. There was grading here. It's been identified on the site plan. We're going to send that over to DFW, and DFW is either going to say, this application or project will result in less than significant impact, or they might ask some questions about the vegetation and what it was. And so you would literally fold those responses in. And it's a little bit tricky, and it's probably easier to discuss with an example and in hand, so to speak. So hopefully we can have the conversation again with some clear examples when we do the technical assistance in July. I think that would be most helpful. We also might be able to dig a little deeper, and I plan on doing more Appendix G meetings over the month of June just to help people get more familiar with the checklist. So Amy, I'm sorry that I don't have like a rock solid piece here. The contiguous expansion affidavit, right, is what you referred in item 3, right, the expansion. So if, for example, you expanded because you had to get outside of a streamside management area and grading or vegetation was removed, we would note that, right, to the best of our ability based on the application materials we've received. Most often DFW, I don't see a lot of comments coming back because of that type of expansion and vegetation modification. Really what we've seen the most of is really just like, okay, you have these hedgerows in the area that native birds nest in, and so please don't prune them during these times. Or you may have a Milo Baker's lupin identified in proximity to your cultivation site and potentially on your parcel. So DFW wants a biological survey, and then you would just put the results of the biological survey in your Appendix G. But again, it's really hard to kind of cover all of the ways it might work because it's going to be project specific. So great topic to bring to our technical assistance days. So hopefully you can make it. We'll be touring the county for those. So with that said, we're 15 minutes after, and I apologize that we did not get to everyone. We will have, as I mentioned, more Appendix G conversations. We might have to additionally have some conversations, continued conversation about sensitive species habitat review. We are open to that. So thank you everyone for joining, your patience with us running over. We hope you have a fabulous long holiday weekend. Stay safe out there, and we will talk to you next week. Bye now.